Welcome to FFRF's weekly Ask an Atheist program. I'm Dan Barker.
I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor. We're co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation producing this program.
The timely topic today is America's forgotten founder, Thomas Paine, whose birthday we're celebrating this Saturday. He was born January 29th, 1736. If you want to participate in today's show by asking questions or making comments, you're welcome to post them right now on Facebook, or you can send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
And we have two guests and experts about Thomas Paine with us today to talk about the upcoming international Zoom event celebrating Paine's birthday this Saturday, and the new Thomas Paine Memorial Association, whose goal is to finally place a monument to this forgotten founder in Washington, D.C.
First, joining us from California is Margaret Downey. She's the founder of the Free Thought Society, a life member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and she's president of the new Thomas Paine Memorial Association. Margaret, you are always making good trouble. Welcome back to Ask an Atheist.
Hello, everyone. Dan, your introduction of me reminds me of a Thomas Paine quote. If there must be trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace.
And we're also very pleased.
A minute to thank. I just want to take a minute to thank the Freedom from Religion Foundation for always being willing to help me make trouble.
Make good trouble. And we're also very pleased to have with us Ian Ruskin. He's also a Thomas Paine Memorial Association board member. He's an author, and he's a performer of the play To Begin the World Over Again, The Life of Thomas Paine. Of course, an allusion to Paine's famous quote about the promise of the United States of America. Ian Ruskin has worked extensively in theater, TV, and film. So thank you so much for being here today.
So even though the show is called Ask an Atheist, Thomas Paine was not an atheist, but neither was he a theist. Thomas Paine was a deist, an 18th century Enlightenment freethinker who did believe in an impersonal creator God, but who was very critical of revealed religion. So before we talk about the Thomas Paine Zoom celebration, which is coming up this Saturday, and the Washington, D.C. Monument Campaign, can we remind viewers why Thomas Paine deserves to be so celebrated? Who wants to go first, Margaret or Ian?
I'll go first.
You're a troublemaker.
Thomas Paine had great vision, and we can credit him for advocating for women's rights, social security, public schools, and even the concept of the United Nations. He was so ahead of his time that Thomas Paine wrote against slavery. He even proposed reparations. So imagine how innovative and brave he was in the late 1700s to talk about labor unions, democratic governments, and social equality.
So Ian, you tell us why you're so interested in Thomas Paine and why we should be honoring him.
Sure. I mean, everything that Margaret just said, plus when I started to read what he'd actually written, it's the language he uses. Paine was not the only person with many of those ideas, but he was the person who wrote them in a way that everyone could understand. He was the first, I think, great propagandist, and I mean that in a very positive way, that he could present ideas to people that what we call the common man and woman could understand. That began particularly in America with common sense. And that's what made him such a dynamic person and a person so threatening to the status quo. Plus, of course, all his ideas, as Margaret mentioned, including in the 1790s, he basically wrote the New Deal that Roosevelt named a few decades later, a few centuries later. So yes, his ideas and his ability with language.
So Ian, he was born in England. Why do we call him one of America's founding fathers?
Well, when he came to Philadelphia, and at the time he arrived, there was still a great debate. Most Americans were not thinking of revolution. They wanted to have a better deal with England. And his common sense, I believe, sparked the American Revolution, literally. Everyone either read it or it was read out loud in pubs and taverns if you couldn't read. And it really changed the whole attitude of the public. And suddenly people were saying, we can be free of England and we can win and we can do it. And that alone, I think, makes him a founding father. He also wrote other things such as American Crisis I, which pretty literally kept Washington's troops willing to fight, without which the war would have been lost. So he had a huge impact on this revolution ever beginning.
Now, we do want to do a sneak preview of this upcoming Zoom event on Payne's birthday, Saturday, January 29th. But first, Margaret, you have absolutely fantastic news about the Monument Project. So do you want to kind of unveil that?
Yeah. Yes, we are thrilled to announce that the Stiefel Free Thought Foundation will be triple matching all donations that we receive from today until midnight, January 29th, the birth date of Thomas Paine. And we thank Todd Stiefel, the founding person and the president of the Stiefel Free Thought Foundation, for his generosity and support for the Thomas Paine Washington, D.C. Statute project.
So we should explain that's being tripled through midnight, January 29th of this year, but the Stiefel Free Thought Foundation will match up to $250,000. It will match until we get that much money from other people. So this is really the shot in the arm that the Thomas Paine Memorial Association has needed, and what generosity.
So if I give $1,000, that makes it $3,000?
If you do that by Saturday midnight. Are you going to do that, Dan?
Well, I might think about that.
And donors can use PayPal or a credit card at the website thomaspainememorial.org. And we will be honoring checks dated from now or January 29th. And the address of the association can be found at the Thomas Paine Memorial website.
And well, this is wonderful news, and I am a secretary of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, and the Freedom from Religion Foundation is an organizational supporter of this project, so we're very proud of this. Now, Margaret, what about the Zoom birthday event, and how can viewers sign up?
It's place on Saturday, January 29th at 1:00 p.m. Pacific time, which is 4:00 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So people can register using the bit.ly link, and you see that on the screen, bit.ly, that's bit.ly/Thomas Paine birthday. So just look it up. It's all over the internet. We Facebook page, and it can be found on our Freedom from Religion Foundation website, as well as the Free Thought Society website and Meetup.
And it's free, and of course it's an amazing cast of characters participating in it. So besides the two of you, Margaret and Ian, and Margaret, I guess this is directed at you, who should we expect to show up at this event?
Well, our very guest is Amy Raskin. Now, he'll be delivering an eloquent closing statement. I believe you have a preview from him to share with us this morning.
Yes, we should have a picture of him and a video coming up in a minute.
Happy birthday, Tom Paine. Thank you for not letting his birthday go unobserved this year. Tom Paine is experiencing a resurgence of popular support as the forces of democracy rally against right-wing authoritarianism and racism and anti-Semitism and all of the irrational forces that have been unleashed in our land and across the globe.
And we should add, we just wanted to do a teaser. We want you to participate in the Zoom event, but he makes a very interesting analysis of the name Common Sense. We were talking about that tract. You don't want to miss it, and he's promised to be a sponsor of the resolution so that the monument will get congressional approval. So you need to thank Representative Jamie Raskin so much.
Jamie Raskin named his son Thomas after Thomas Paine, and if you've got his new book, Unthinkable, which is right now, I think it's #1 New York Times best-selling book for nonfiction, his book about the insurrection and about the death of his son and about being the chair of the impeachment committee and all of those things. So it's a fascinating book, and you'll be able to meet and you'll be able to see Jamie Raskin at the Zoom event on Saturday.
So Margaret, what else will be happening? I think we're frozen.
Thomas Paine.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Well, audience members will be meeting all of the members of the board of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. And those include comedian, writer, and actor Julius Sweeney, and historian and Thomas Paine expert Garen. We also have the Center for Inquiry. Yes. We also have the Center for Inquiry CEO Robin Blumner. She'll be in the audience. And then we also have actor John Delancey. So do we want to hear a little bit of what John Delancey has to say?
Revolutions start with ideas, and Tom Paine was a wellspring. Interestingly, his ideas are as explosive today as they were 200 years ago. That's why we're honoring him. Paine put into words the sentiments of freedom-loving people everywhere. He was so influential that he not only helped birth the American Revolution, but from a prison cell in Paris, he gave spark to the French Revolution as well.
Also have a little snippet of what Robin Blumner recorded for this event. A lot of this is going to be live, but these are some of the people who pre-recorded. So let's play that.
In reading through various Thomas Paine quotes, all brilliant, by the way, I was struck by this one. He said, "To argue with a person who has renounced the use of reason is like administering medicine to the dead." How relevant for today's epidemic of COVID misinformation and anti-vax hysteria. If only more people read, listened to, and understood Thomas Paine, well, I don't think we would have 800,000 dead Americans.
Wow.
So who else will be there?
Yes. Actually, John Delancey's wife is also a Thomas Paine Memorial Association board member, and she has a special surprise for us in her welcome. We also are hosting historian and professor Christopher Cameron. He'll be with us live from his home in North Carolina. And director, writer, and producer Andrianne plans to be with us live as well.
And of course, she was married to Carl Sagan, has written so many bestsellers, is behind the current Cosmos. So we're so pleased she'll be there.
And I also want to mention that recording artist James Clue will be singing 2 very special songs about Thomas Paine, and one of which is a surprise to the audience. Here's a quick preview.
In a chariot of light from the regions of day, the goddess of liberty came. 10,000 celestials directed the way, and hither conducted the day. A fair budding branch from the gardens above, where millions with millions agree. She brought in her hand as a pledge of her love, the plant she named Liberty Tree.
So that will, and of course, we will also have live Zenos Rudakis from his studio, correct, Margaret, where he is sculpting the Thomas Paine Memorial.
Right. He'll be talking to us from Glenside, Pennsylvania, and people will be able to see the wonderful work he's done so far on the statue, as well as some of the items that he has around his studio are just remarkable.
And he's done so much study of, I think that there's this death, what do you call it, a death mask, and he's seen all the other sculptures, and he's read everything. He really does his homework. But I think that sculpture looks a little bit like you, Ian.
Huh. Well, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe you're a descendant. Who knows?
Yes, who knows?
So that's going to be a really fun program, and we want everyone to tune in. But in the meantime, we have you two who are also going to be participating on Saturday, who are such experts on Thomas Paine. And I wonder if I can ask you, Ian, more about, perhaps you do this whole one-man show. You probably use a lot of Paine quotes. What are some of the most moving things that he has written that you would like to talk about?
One of the things that's really extraordinary with my Paine play, I read from short excerpts from most of his major works, and there are times when the audience literally gasp. I can hear this sound coming from the audience when I'm reading something about slavery, I have a line that the true oppression is not monarchy, it's poverty. And that leads into part of his writings of agrarian justice. His words are so relevant today. It's kind of shocking in a way that they still are, but they are. And I think more than any other figure I can think of from history, he affects people today. The other thing I want to say very quickly is he was one of the first great immigrants. He was English. He came to America. He went to France, back and forth from England to France. He was nearly hung in England. He was nearly guillotined in France. He came back to America and was not allowed to vote because they said he was not an American. This man truly was, and he said, "I am a citizen of the world." And I would ask people when they think about him and think about their attitude to the world, he saw the whole world as being his brothers and sisters, if you like. And I think it would be a wonderful thing if more of us thought in that way.
Well, I have a question then. If he was such an important founder, so instrumental in the American Revolution, he even named the United States of America, why has there never been a memorial or a statue to Thomas Paine in Washington, D.C. before?
Well, he was always an outsider. He was English. He was poor. He also, remember, this is a man who attacked slavery, and slavery was the economic foundation of America then, and of almost all of the founding fathers. His ideas were too radical. You know, he talked about every man having the right to vote. He didn't quite get to women, but he got close. His ideas were so radical that the powers that be could not accept them or welcome him in. And since, in my opinion, the powers that be are the ones who write the history books, he's not in the history books very much either.
And Margaret, you might have some thoughts too. And of course, my thought would be remembering Teddy Roosevelt, President Teddy Roosevelt, denouncing him as a dirty little atheist. We've already established he was a deist. But much of this would come from the book, The Age of Reason, that he partly apparently wrote in the Bastille, you know, that it was critical of religion. Don't you think that played some of a role?
Yes. Part one was written when he was not a prisoner. Part two was written when he was imprisoned. And he memorized the Bible line by line. So he was a remarkable person. The fact that some people think that he was poor is really a tabloid attack on Thomas Paine. Remember, Thomas Paine had several properties, and he had money to give to children and to Madame Bonneville, and he had the farm in New Rochelle, New York. He had property in Bordentown, New Jersey. We know a lot about Thomas Paine, but unfortunately, a lot of rumors have been circulated about Thomas Paine not being a nice person, or, they tried to denounce his personality, called him a drunk. And we know that that's not true. A drunk could never write the way Thomas Paine wrote. So we have proof that he was brilliant, that he was accomplished, that he was ahead of his time. And I adopted Thomas Paine as my hero when I was a teenager, because all of his writings were so on point, particularly about religion.
He was kind of a polymath, though. I mean, he was brilliant, had so many different fires there going. And there has been a time in the past where there was a resolution to put up the monument in D.C. It wasn't possible to raise the money in time. So I know, Margaret, you were part of that, and now you've really been the instigator of this. The perseverance you've shown is wonderful. But now we have a chance again to honor him. And it's not just sticking up a statue, it's making sure that children and people in our nation know who he is, and know one of the founders that we don't have to be ashamed of, as Andrian has put it. We need to take down some of those other statues, but this is a statue that we need to put up.
Yes, yes. And I'm so happy that we now have a lot of help. This birthday celebration is being co-sponsored by the Thomas Paine Historical Association and American Humanist, Freedom from Religion, Free Thought Society, Center for Inquiry. And the more backing we get from these national groups, the more success we'll have. So I'm asking and pleading for people to not only support us, but to also come along for the ride as co-sponsors of what we do.
And we put up on the screen again, you can go to the Thomas Paine Memorial Association website and donate, and that will be, your donation will be tripled through midnight Saturday, January 29th, but it will be matched until we raise the funds. So it's a wonderful matching gift from Stiefel Free Thought Foundation, and we're so grateful to him, and he's done so much for the Free Thought movement before, but this is a big game changer for this whole project, terribly important. So I don't know if we have questions yet, but I do want to give Ian another chance to talk a little bit. Any final words you want to say, things you want to share about Thomas Paine?
Well, I'd like to say this. There are three men who have great monuments in Washington, D.C. There's George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln. The first two had slaves. That's a reality. That doesn't wipe out their legacy. But all we want to do is have a statue of Thomas Paine. We're not asking for a great building. But I think the point of statues is it does make you think. If you go and stand in front of it and perhaps you read some words, it can get you considering this person that maybe you never thought of before. That's why we're all involved in this particular campaign. I would just say Paine is, I think, the most misunderstood man in American history. And it really, really is time for us to listen to his words, talk about them, debate them. He loved debate. You don't have to agree with everything he says, but read what he says, learn about his thinking, because it was part of what made America come to be.
And Margaret, we do have questions, but did you have any concluding remarks before we take those?
Well, I have seen Ian perform as Thomas Paine, and it is so breathtaking. I I adore Ian and his talent. In fact, I've called on him several times to come out and perform, and I would encourage anyone watching this who has a venue that can host Ian as Thomas Paine. We would be most grateful for that.
And Ian, you don't have to fake the accent, do you?
No, the accent is still pretty, it's interesting, the accent, as to whether Paine had because he was born in Norfolk, that's a particular accent, but he lived many years in London, so I kind of do a London accent. Not posh, because he was never posh. He was always one of the people.
Well,
Thank you, Margaret.
Right.
Well, you would notice the differences. Over here, it all sounds British to us. So,
So we have some questions?
we do have questions. Heather Johnson is asking, why do you think Paine's contributions to our founding are not more of a focus in the schools?
Yes. Well, I've been trying to reach school children through providing Thomas Paine themed assemblies. And I have discovered that Thomas Paine was literally written out of textbooks. Apparently, he was feared as encouraging questioning, free thinking, and this was a little scary for the people who wrote school books. When my assembly, I end saying to the children to ask questions of their teachers and their parents, and demand answers. I push free thinking when I do the assemblies, and I just think we have to make a concerted effort to convince the textbook writers that Thomas Paine deserves a large piece of information in those books, if not just for the fact that he named the United States, his crisis papers and common sense continued the revolutionary thinking and was responsible. Without the pen of Thomas Paine, the Revolutionary War would not have been won.
So we do have some more questions, but they're not about Thomas Paine. They're about other topics. Do you want to wrap up Paine and go, or do we want to?
Other topics. Well, I guess give us there's one more Paine one we're told. Can you scroll down?
Well, I don't see it on here. Somebody's asking, isn't the original source of disinformation is the Bible? So, and
Well,
Paine did write about the Bible.
Oh,
so.
he certainly did in the Age of Reason. Do either of you want to talk a little bit more about the Age of Reason?
Well, I want to throw in one quick thing in support of what Margaret said. I perform quite often in community colleges in Los Angeles County, where my audiences
I have
are
the wrong one.
well over 50% either immigrants or children of immigrants. They're my most important audience. They totally understand, and we always have to remember that Paine was an immigrant. He was not considered an American, but that in itself makes him controversial in today's America. So that's just one point. In terms of Age of Reason, yes, he had a lot of critical things to say about all written religious texts. He wasn't just attacking the Bible. He felt that the human being could have and did have a direct connection to God. And he felt that written stories and rules and moralities were not helpful. They actually got in the way, if you like, between me and God. And so that's really what he was supporting. He was never anti-spiritual thought or feeling. He just wanted us to all have a direct connection to God.
Well,
and it did cost him dearly.
But of course, he was a deist in the sense of the Enlightenment, and a critic of revealed religions. I think that's the word he liked to use. But Dan, do we have another question there?
Well, somehow I lost the file for the questions for this. Maybe Maybe keep talking and Lauren will come in here and refresh it for me.
Okay.
Yes, I wanted to add a little something to that. The Age of Reason actually was establishing some type of substitute for biblical belief and trust in ministers and priests and rabbis. He said, I believe in the quality of man, and I believe that religious duties consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creature. Now, if that's not words to live by, I don't know what.
To make you froze. I don't know that. To make our fellow what?
Fellow creatures happy.
There we go. A little bit like Robert Ingersoll. Well, and of course, I mean, it's I think everybody's favorite quote. The world is my country. All men are my brothers. I wish it also said sisters. And do good is my religion. A very, very famous quote. And in fact, the Capital Times, which used to publish daily in Madison, Wisconsin, was in the 1950s the leading newspaper against Joe McCarthy and McCarthyism, put that quote up every single day for, I don't know, 4 decades or something. It was always on their editorial page. It was their banner. And I think that's true in so many instances. That quote or other quotes that Thomas Paine have said really do unite us in his love of liberty.
So Lauren got me the file back here.
Good.
Kevin Glover, I wonder if it's Danny's brother. Kevin Glover asks, he sent an email asking, perhaps aside from his support for the Jacobins during the French Revolution, what other reasons did Thomas Paine fall out of favor with the other founders and with the American public?
Well, there was one incident that after having been for 11 months and begging for help from George Washington, and being totally ignored by George Washington because of a political stance. He didn't want to be entangled with Thomas Paine because of the Age of Reason being published, and it was very, very controversial, and George Washington was being very political and avoiding Thomas Paine. Well, when Thomas Paine was finally released
from the Bastille,
in the care...
Correct.
Pardon?
He was finally released from the Bastille.
Yes, when he was finally released in Paris, he went to live with James Monroe, and he wrote a scathing letter about how George Washington had been ignoring him and wasn't good for the country because he had become God to the citizens. Well, that got published, and sure enough, it was a blowback against Thomas Paine for speaking the truth about how he was ignored during his imprisonment.
You're breaking up a little bit.
Luxembourg.
Oh, great. Sorry about that. We're just trying to indicate where you broke up there. And Ian, do you have anything to add on that question?
Well, yes, I have this. In fact, I'm working on a screenplay, and I have a scene between Paine and Benjamin Franklin, because Paine was regarded as Franklin's political son, adopted political son. But in this scene, they're having a conversation in a tavern, and Paine is saying this and that, and I'm going to talk about this, and Franklin keeps saying, for God's sake, Paine, don't say that. Leave it alone. And of course, Paine doesn't. And Franklin was a fairly radical figure. Paine could not keep his mouth shut. And yes, so the letter that he wrote to Washington that Margaret just described, Washington was like a god. No one attacked Washington. So add that on to the fact that Age of Reason had come out, and add that on to the publicity against Paine. I read that when he arrived back in America, he went into New York. My facts might be slightly off, but the first 3 taverns he went into for a beer refused to serve him.
Wow.
And there's some truth in that, I think. And it's kind of shocking.
Wow. Well, he was speaking.
And even as friendly as he was with Thomas Jefferson, he would berate Thomas Jefferson for having slaves. And in fact, wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson and signed it a slave. And of course, Thomas Jefferson knew it came from Thomas Paine and was very upset and did not speak to Thomas Paine after that.
Well, and as well, Paine should have written that letter because basically Jefferson bred wealth. He bred enslaved people. It was so.
Well, that's the next question
ugly.
we have. Heather Johnson is asking, why do you think people, especially people today, I guess, why do you think people choose to identify with slave-owning founders instead of founders like Paine?
Well, there's been 200 years of propaganda, you could call it, in support of those founding fathers who had slaves. And it's only, I think, beginning to be more deeply challenged. That's just the way America was built. It was built on being run by educated white men, which it to a large extent still is, and it was built on those men and the economy having free human labor. And as with any nation, all nations tell their stories as being positive. That's part of human nature in a way. And America's no different. America has its own way of telling its story and glorifying its beginnings and leaving out anything that is unpleasant. And that's a shame, because America would be richer, is becoming richer by acknowledging, I think,
I wonder,
those things.
excuse me, I wonder if either of you know something about Paine and Native American advocacy. And since Dan's a member of the Delaware tribe, do you know of anything with Paine?
About Paine?
We're not experts,
Yes.
but maybe you are.
The Revolutionary War, he was the adversary to speak to Native American tribes. He actually went out and conducted a lot of communication, and he was instrumental, by the way, in the purchase of Louisiana. It was encouraged by Thomas Paine in the hopes that he could help the Native American tribes living there.
Could I add one thing to that?
Sure.
That he wrote, I think it was in Common Sense, wherever it was, he wrote this wonderful piece saying that he had never in Indian tribes, as I think they were called then, seen the kind of poverty and despair that he saw in the civilized world. The tribes never had the slums of London or Paris or Philadelphia. He saw an equality in the way they lived that was far superior morally than the inequality that was part of the Western world even then. And that to me was an extraordinary way of looking at the two kinds of cultures, kinds of ways of living. He wrote a lot about the morality of the way the Native Americans were living and lived with each other.
I was just reading in Graeber and Wengrow's book, The Dawn of Everything, that indigenous American philosophers and politicians were actually critical of European society. They were informing European society, and in fact had a lot to do with some of the views of the Enlightenment. And some of the speeches by indigenous Americans that were being told at the time were actually being read in Europe. And the natives were shocked that there was a structure of authority that people had to obey, they were even more shocked that people would obey the authority, because they lived in societies that were pretty much egalitarian and where women were equal. In fact, some of the captive children who were raised in indigenous families didn't want to go back to the European culture. They loved the freedom that they had there. So it was a two-way street that was going on. The philosophers were talking in both directions, and Paine must have known about a lot of that dialogue.
And in fact, in Agrarian Justice, he advocates that every American, indigenous people included, have a piece of property and get a stipend to live on. So he was very aware of trying to get equality for every Native American and colony, the inhabitants of the colonies.
Is there another question, Dan?
I don't see another question unless I'm not refreshing this right.
Well, so there's
Oh,
no
no
more
more
questions,
questions.
but so then let's put up, if we can again, a link, the link to the Thomas Paine Zoom event on Saturday, January 29th, which is, what number are we at with his anniversary? Margaret, do you remember?
Oh, I think it's 287. I
Something
have
like
it
that,
written down.
280th plus.
1737.
He was born in 1737.
So 15 years short of
Let's do the math later. Anyway, you can sign up for that event, as you can see on our screen, ffrf.us/Thomas Paine. You can go to the Thomas Paine Memorial Association website. You can go to the Facebook and sign up. And you can also donate toward the memorial that is 200 plus years overdue to Thomas Paine. All we're looking at is a statue in DC, but that's the least we can do, and it will be tripled through Saturday, January 29th, and then it will be matched until we come up with enough funds to do it. Anything else to add, Margaret?
I would probably just do another note. The most formidable weapon against errors of any kind is reason. Thomas Paine said, "I have never used any other, and I trust I never shall."
Well, thank you, Margaret. And Ian, we want to give you a final word.
A final word. I was once asked in a very early performance at a community college, what is the most important line in your play? Which was a very good question. And the line is actually, I confess it's my words, but I believe it's Paine's sentiments, that one must always speak the truth as one sees it, no matter the consequences. That to me is Thomas Paine.
Well, thank you both for joining us and for your work on the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. We're going to get it done. And we also want to ask you to look for our interview with U.S. Representative Hank Johnson, who's a member of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. That's on this week's TV show, Free Thought Matters. And in this short clip, we have a preview. Representative Johnson talks about the true nature of the evangelical movement in America.
Well, it's no question that the evangelical movement at its core was a political movement. It's a political movement that parades under the guise of religion. And the purveyors of that thinking use good people who are honestly seeking, spiritual goodness, but it's misleading those people into a political framework. And it uses those people to go out and vote for right-wing free marketers. It's all about money. And it's all about money and power.
Well, you can see the rest of that interview with Representative Hank Johnson on Free Thought Matters on broadcast TV stations all across the country. Or you can see it on our Facebook and YouTube channels as well.
And if you want to hear more about the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, we'll be talking about it this week on Free Thought Radio with Margaret. So you can go to ffrf.org/radio to learn where to listen to that and the stations that you can find Free Thought Matters on, including Los Angeles. Thank you for watching FFRF's Ask an Atheist.
And coming back next week, you can come back next week, same time, same place, at noon Central on Wednesdays, or watch it on FFRF's YouTube channel. We'll see you this Saturday for the Payne event, and then we'll see you next week for this show.